Let's start with something bold. There is nothing mysterious or secret about the female body, only things society has taught people not to talk about. And that silence, it creates confusion, shame, and harmful myths that affect relationships, confidence, and health. Today, we're breaking that silence. Because when you understand the truth about the body, you don't just become informed, you become respectful, confident, and empowered. What if everything you think you know is actually wrong? What if the facts you've picked up over time are nothing more than repeated myths dressed up as truth? That's the reality for a lot of people today. We live in a world where information is everywhere, but accuracy is rare. And when it comes to the human body, especially topics people feel awkward discussing, misinformation spreads even faster. You've probably seen it: perfect images, bold claims, secret tips, and viral advice that sounds convincing but has no real scientific backing. The problem is, when you hear something often enough, your brain starts accepting it as truth. That's how myths become beliefs, and beliefs shape your mindset, your expectations, and even your behavior. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop consuming blindly and start questioning intentionally. Just because something is popular doesn't make it correct. Just because it's trending doesn't make it true. And just because everyone says it doesn't mean it's based on real knowledge. Science doesn't work on opinions. It works on evidence, research, and consistent results over time. Think about this. How many insecurities are created not because of reality, but because of comparison to unrealistic standards? How many doubts come from things you've heard but never actually verified? This is exactly why choosing truth over myths is powerful. It frees you from unnecessary confusion and replaces it with clarity. When you begin to rely on accurate, science-based understanding, something changes internally. You stop overthinking things that were never problems in the first place. You stop chasing unrealistic expectations. And most importantly, you start seeing things as they actually are, not as they've been exaggerated or distorted. Another important part of this is recognizing how myths are designed to trigger emotions. They often play on curiosity, fear, or insecurity. They make you feel like you're missing out, like something is wrong, or like you need to fix something immediately. But real medical knowledge doesn't rush you, scare you, or pressure you. It educates you calmly and clearly. So the next time you hear a claim that sounds shocking, exciting, or too good to be true, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, where is this coming from? Is there real evidence behind it? Or is it just another recycled idea that sounds convincing on the surface? Because once you train your mind to question, to verify, and to seek real understanding, you gain something most people don't have: clarity. And clarity is what separates confusion from confidence. Have you ever looked at someone and thought, that's how it's supposed to be? What if that idea itself is the problem? What if the standard you're comparing everything to isn't even real? From a very early age, people are exposed to images, opinions, and subtle messages that suggest there is a right way for a body to look, function, or respond. Over time, those repeated messages quietly build a mental benchmark. And without even realizing it, you start measuring everything and everyone against that invisible standard. But here's the truth most people don't talk about. There is no universal template. Human bodies are incredibly diverse. Differences in shape, structure, proportions, skin tone, and natural responses are not exceptions. They are the norm. Biology doesn't follow a single design. It operates across a wide spectrum. What you often see online or in media is not a reflection of that diversity. It's a narrow, curated version of it. And this is where the real issue begins. When you believe there's only one correct version, anything outside of it starts to feel unusual, even if it's completely normal. That mindset can quietly create unrealistic expectations, not just for others, but also in how you interpret what's natural versus what's not. Now think about the impact of that. Misunderstandings grow, judgments form. Confidence gets affected, not because something is wrong, but because something is different. And difference in a world obsessed with uniformity is often misunderstood. But difference is not a flaw. It's actually a sign of how complex and adaptable the human body is. Genetics, hormones, environment, lifestyle, all of these factors interact to create variations. No two people are built exactly the same, and that's not something to question. It's something to recognize. Here, where your mindset matters. The moment you shift from comparison to understanding, everything changes. Instead of asking, "Why isn't this the same?" you start asking, "Is this within the range of normal?" That single shift moves you from assumption to awareness. And awareness builds respect. Respect means you stop labeling differences as better or worse. You stop making quick judgments based on limited exposure. You become more open, more informed, and more grounded in reality rather than perception. It also changes how you interact with others. When you understand that variation is natural, you're less likely to expect unrealistic things. You communicate better. You approach situations with more patience and less pressure. But this kind of thinking doesn't happen automatically. It requires unlearning what you've been conditioned to believe. It requires stepping back and recognizing that what you've seen repeatedly is not necessarily the full picture. So the next time your mind tries to compare, pause and question it. Ask yourself whether you're looking at reality or just a filtered version of it. Because the more you train yourself to see diversity as normal, the more balanced and informed your perspective becomes. Why do some people walk into a room with quiet confidence, while others hesitate, overthink, and second-guess themselves? What if the difference isn't appearance, status, or experience, but simply understanding? Most people think confidence is something you're born with. Either you have it or you don't. But that's not how it works. Real, lasting confidence is built on one thing: clarity. And clarity comes from understanding what's real, what's normal, and what actually matters. Now think about where insecurity usually begins. It starts in uncertainty. Not knowing if something is normal. Not knowing how the body works. Not knowing what to expect. That not knowing creates hesitation, and hesitation creates doubt. You begin to question yourself, your assumptions, and even your reactions, not because something is wrong, but because you don't have the right information to feel grounded. This is exactly where understanding changes everything. When you take the time to learn how the body actually works, based on science, not rumors, you remove that uncertainty. You replace guesses with facts. You replace confusion with clarity. And suddenly, situations that once felt awkward or intimidating start to feel manageable, even simple. Here's something important. Confidence is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing enough to not be misled. Because when you lack understanding, you become vulnerable to misinformation. You start believing exaggerated claims, unrealistic expectations, and misleading advice. And those false beliefs slowly shape how you think and how you react. But once you begin to understand things properly, you start seeing through the noise. You recognize what's exaggerated and what's real. You stop falling for extremes. You develop a balanced perspective that isn't easily shaken by opinions or trends. And that creates a different kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation. It also changes how you carry yourself. When you understand something, your tone becomes calmer. Your reactions become more measured. You're not constantly trying to figure things out in the moment because you've already built a foundation of knowledge. Now imagine the opposite. Someone who relies only on assumptions. Someone who believes everything they hear. Someone who never questions or verifies. That person is constantly uncertain, even if they try to appear confident on the surface. Because deep down, there's no solid ground, just scattered information and mixed signals. Understanding gives you that solid ground. It allows you to approach situations without panic or pressure. It helps you separate facts from fears. And most importantly, it puts you in control of your own thoughts instead of letting outside noise control them. Another powerful shift happens when you start learning consistently. You become curious instead of anxious. Instead of avoiding topics because they feel confusing, you start exploring them. You ask better questions. You seek better answers. And over time, that curiosity builds real confidence, because now it's backed by knowledge, not guesswork. You stop reacting emotionally to everything you hear. You start thinking critically. You start trusting your ability to understand rather than blindly accepting what's presented to you. And that's where real confidence lives, not in appearance, not in pretending, but in knowing. What if the biggest problem is what people don't feel, but what they don't say? How many misunderstandings, frustrations, and silent disappointments exist, not because something is wrong, but because nothing was ever clearly communicated? Most people assume others will just understand. They expect signals to be obvious, reactions to be interpreted correctly, and needs to be recognized without ever expressing them directly. But the reality is, the human mind doesn't read thoughts, it responds to clarity. And when there is no clarity, people fill in the gaps with assumptions. Those assumptions are where things start to fall apart. A simple situation can turn complicated. A small misunderstanding can grow into distance. And often, both sides believe something completely different is happening, without realizing that the root issue is a lack of open, honest communication. Now think about why people avoid speaking openly. Sometimes it's discomfort. Sometimes it's fear of judgment. Sometimes it's the belief that talking about certain topics is awkward or unnecessary. But avoiding communication doesn't remove the issue, it only delays it. And over time, what's unspoken doesn't disappear, it builds up. This is why communication is not just helpful, it's powerful. When you express clearly, you remove guesswork. You create alignment between what you feel and what the other person understands. Instead of leaving things open to interpretation, you make them direct and precise. And that changes everything. Clarity reduces confusion. It prevents unnecessary overthinking. It creates a space where both sides know what's actually going on instead of trying to decode each other's behavior. Here's something most people overlook. Communication is not just about talking, it's about how you talk. Tone matters, timing matters, respect matters. You can say the right thing in the wrong way and still create tension. But when communication is calm, respectful, and honest, it becomes constructive instead of confrontational. It builds trust. Because when someone feels they can express without being judged or dismissed, they're more likely to be open. And that openness creates stronger, more stable connections. Now consider the opposite. When communication is avoided, everything becomes uncertain. People start overanalyzing small actions. They begin to question intentions. They rely on assumptions instead of facts. And assumptions are rarely accurate. One person might think everything is fine, while the other is silently uncomfortable. One might believe something is understood, while the other is completely unaware. This disconnect doesn't come from complexity, it comes from silence. Another important aspect is listening. True communication isn't just about expressing your side. It's also about understanding the other side without immediately reacting or interrupting. When people feel heard, they become more willing to communicate honestly. When they feel ignored, they withdraw. So communication becomes a two-way exchange of clarity, not a one-sided effort. It also requires courage. Because speaking honestly means being vulnerable. It means saying what you actually think instead of what feels safe. But that vulnerability is what creates real understanding. Without it, everything stays on the surface, polite, but unclear. And over time, surface-level communication leads to deeper problems, because nothing meaningful is ever fully addressed. Why do people feel embarrassed about something that is completely natural? Who decided that normal biological processes should be hidden, whispered about, or avoided altogether? And more importantly, what has that silence actually cost? Shame doesn't start as something you're born with. It's learned. It's picked up through reactions, comments, jokes, and the way certain topics are treated as off-limits. Over time, that repeated messaging creates a quiet belief. This is something I shouldn't talk about. And once that belief takes hold, people stop asking questions. They stop seeking clarity. They avoid conversations. They pretend to understand, even when they don't. That's how the shame cycle begins. It feeds on silence and grows in confusion. Think about how powerful that is. A completely normal part of biology becomes something people feel uncomfortable even thinking about. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because they've been conditioned to associate it with embarrassment. Now here's the real problem. When shame replaces understanding, misinformation takes its place. If someone feels too awkward to ask a question, where do they go instead? They turn to unreliable sources, random opinions, or incomplete information. And without proper guidance, those answers can be misleading or entirely wrong. This is how myths survive, not because they're true, but because no one feels comfortable challenging them openly. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in perspective. You have to start recognizing that discomfort doesn't mean something is inappropriate. It often means something hasn't been normalized yet. And the only way to normalize it is through open, informed discussion. But that's not always easy. It requires unlearning years of conditioning. It requires questioning beliefs you've accepted without thinking. And it requires pushing past that initial hesitation that tells you to stay quiet. Here's something to consider. Every area of health improves with awareness. When people talk openly about nutrition, fitness, or mental health, knowledge spreads, understanding improves, better decisions are made. But when a topic is surrounded by shame, it stays misunderstood. And what stays misunderstood can't be managed properly. That's why breaking the shame cycle is not just about comfort. It's about health, awareness, and informed choices. Another important factor is how shame affects perception. When something is labeled as embarrassing, it automatically feels abnormal, even if it's not. That perception can distort reality, making people believe that what they're experiencing is unusual, when in fact it's completely within the range of normal. And that misperception leads to unnecessary worry. Now imagine the opposite environment. A space where questions are welcomed, where information is shared without judgment, where understanding replaces awkwardness. In that kind of environment, learning becomes easier. People feel more confident seeking answers, and the entire conversation shifts from avoidance to awareness. But that shift has to start somewhere. It starts with individuals choosing to question the stigma instead of accepting it. It starts with recognizing that silence doesn't protect, it limits. Because the longer something is left unspoken, the more power the shame around it holds. What if the real limitation isn't your body, but your mindset about it? What if the way you think is quietly shaping how you see everything, what you believe, how you react, and what you accept as normal? Most people focus on improving what's visible. They try to change appearance, outcomes, or situations, but they overlook the one thing that controls all of it, their thinking patterns. Because the truth is, your mindset acts like a filter. It decides whether you interpret something as a problem, a mystery, or simply a fact. And if that filter is built on myths, assumptions, or incomplete information, then everything you see through it becomes distorted. This is why leveling up your mindset is not optional, it's essential. Think about how quickly people jump to conclusions. One unfamiliar situation, one unexpected detail, and the mind starts filling in the blanks, often with the worst or most inaccurate possibilities. That reaction doesn't come from reality, it comes from conditioning. A mindset that isn't trained will always default to assumption. But a mindset that is developed begins to pause, question, and analyze. Instead of reacting instantly, it processes information. It asks, is this actually true? Is this supported by facts? Or am I just repeating something I've heard before? That small shift, from reacting to thinking, changes everything. Because now, you're not controlled by every piece of information that comes your way. You become selective. You choose what to accept and what to reject based on logic, not emotion. And that's where growth begins. Another key part of leveling up your mindset is curiosity. Most people avoid what they don't understand. They scroll past it, ignore it, or feel uncomfortable engaging with it. But a strong mindset does the opposite. It leans in. It sees confusion as an opportunity to learn, not something to escape. That curiosity builds knowledge, and that knowledge builds confidence. Over time, you start noticing a difference. You're not easily influenced by trends or opinions. You don't feel the need to compare or overanalyze everything. You begin to operate from a place of understanding rather than uncertainty. And that creates a sense of control. Not control over everything around you, but control over how you interpret it. Now consider what happens without that growth. The mind stays reactive. It believes what it hears without questioning. It gets influenced by exaggerated claims and unrealistic expectations. And without realizing it, decisions start being made based on flawed thinking. This is how people stay stuck, not because they lack ability, but because they haven't upgraded the way they think. A higher level mindset doesn't mean knowing everything. It means knowing how to think. It means being able to separate facts from noise, logic from emotion, and reality from perception. It also means being open to change. Because as you learn more, some of your previous beliefs will be challenged, and that can feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is part of growth. It's a sign that your thinking is evolving. The more you embrace that process, the stronger your mindset becomes. And the stronger your mindset becomes, the more clearly you see things for what they are, not what they appear to be.